He's the most famous composer in history, an unparalleled genius whose struggle with despair and disability only magnifies the awe we feel for his creative expression. Ludwig van Beethoven, history has made you immortal. The only way to properly honor such a maestro is to steal his skull from his grave? That's a head-scratcher. It's the insane story of the heist for Beethoven's head. Stay tuned. Just last year, Beethoven would have celebrated his 250th birthday. Stay spry, my guy. Ludwig van Beethoven was born in 1770 in what is now Germany. His father was a mediocre musician and an alcoholic who abused his son while teaching him to play instruments. Beethoven grew up to be a lonely, depressed, but undoubtedly brilliant composer. In his late 20s, he began to struggle with an especially cruel malady for a musician: deafness. Despite this setback, Beethoven created some of the most famous pieces in the history of music. Among them, Symphony No. 5, Ode to Joy, and the Moonlight Sonata. Since then, the name Beethoven has been associated with beautiful music. Also with a 1992 family about a kooky St. Bernard, but that's neither here nor there. While the human Beethoven was already legendary in his lifetime, along with his deafness, he suffered from a host of other serious and chronic health problems, and died in 1827 of cirrhosis of the liver. After a lifetime of composing, he began a new career of decomposing. Too soon? After Beethoven's death, doctors conducted an autopsy, while a sculptor made an intensely unsettling mask of his face. The doctor who performed the postmortem was not particularly gentle. To be fair, his patient couldn't complain, and much of the skull was shattered to bits. He also removed Beethoven's ear bones, apparently trying to figure out the cause of his deafness. I don't want to question this doctor's protocol, but the ear bones were never seen again, and the skull was literally taped back together for the burial. Fortunately, Beethoven was buried with all the pomp and ceremony that was lacking from his art project autopsy. Some say as many as 30,000 people showed up to his funeral. But after the big shebang, someone mysteriously offered a substantial reward to anyone who could steal the skull from the grave. At the time, a lot of people believed in a wacky and quacky pseudoscience called phrenology. That's the belief that measuring bumps on the skull can predict a person's personality traits or intelligence. This immensely stupid idea was used to justify racism and misogyny, and phrenologists love collecting the skulls of geniuses, white male geniuses of course, to prove that they had the right bumps. The skull of another famous composer, Joseph Haydn, was stolen 18 years earlier to see just how well developed his music bump was. The grave robbers swapped his skull for a different one, and poor Haydn didn't get his head back until 1954. When they eventually reburied his skull with the rest of his body, they didn't take out the fake one. So some future archaeologist is definitely going to assume Joseph Haydn had two heads. A third composer, no less than Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, may have also been a victim of skull snatching. These folks just can't get enough. Supposedly, a grave robber snuck off with a composer's cranium in 1801. This skull is in a museum, but tests to prove whether or not it really belonged to Mozart have been inconclusive. It's also not on public display, because apparently it was freaking everybody out. Mozart, Legend of the Cursed Skull, in theaters next summer. Point is, there were definitely people who wanted that sweet, sweet Beethoven brain case, and they were willing to pay top dollar to get their hands on it. Beethoven's friends posted a guard on the tomb to deter grave robbers, but in classic heist fashion, they didn't count on the inside man. In 1863, Beethoven's body was exhumed, along with another composer who was buried nearby, Franz Schubert. The excuse was that they were repairing the grave and hooking old Ludwig up with a fancier metal coffin. But hey, as long as we got him up here, why don't we just have a quick look at those famous skull bumps? Yeah, the phrenologists were now seen as legit, and in the interest of scientific research, they dug up these two dead, famous jam makers, but promised to put them back. But did they swear on their graves? The phrenologists took some pictures of Beethoven's skull, which at this point looked like a prop from Pirates of the Caribbean. But you may recall that Beethoven's skull had taken a pretty bad beating during his autopsy, and the fragments were only held together by gauze. 36 years later, these pieces were sort of just lying around the head. Apparently, one of the doctors, a man named Romeo Seligman, decided to abscond with a number of the bone fragments as some kind of souvenir, I guess. Supposedly, Romeo proudly displayed the bones by his bedside, because that's not creepy or weird at all. Because stolen human remains obviously make a charming family heirloom, the bones were passed down through Seligman's family, kept in a metal box labeled Beethoven, lest they confuse it with their other stolen skull bits. They crossed the Atlantic and eventually wound up in the attic of one of Seligman's descendants in California. He donated them to the Center for Beethoven Studies at San Jose State University, where they were analyzed for answers about Beethoven's life and cause of death. So, all's well that ends well, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. In fact, the bone fragments were studied for things like lead traces and DNA and other sciencey stuff. As they conducted their analysis, one scientist examined the largest remaining fragment and found that it came from the front of the skull. Hey, let's see that picture of Beethoven's skull again. Yeah, that skull was straight up chopped in half during the autopsy from hell, meaning that this large front piece of skull wouldn't be intact, meaning the skull fragment could not possibly be Beethoven's. Plot twist. So this leaves us with a lot of questions. Whose skull did Romeo Seligman pass down to his descendants? What happened after the 1863 exhumation? Did someone else take the real skull pieces? And hey, while we're at it, what the heck happened to his ear bones? If you find any random bones lying around your grandma's house, check them out. They could belong to one of the most famous musicians of all time. For now, historians are still miffed about what really happened to Beethoven's skull, or where it could be. Oh God, it's behind you. Dun 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 dun.